My own mother called the police, falsely accusing me of theft simply because I refused to be my sister's unpaid, full-time nanny. She thought handcuffs would force my compliance, so I unleashed a legal nightmare that permanently evicted them all. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The pounding on my front door was what woke me. It wasn't the polite, hesitant knock of a delivery driver or the familiar, rhythmic tap of a neighbor. It was a heavy, authoritative thud that vibrated through the floorboards of my small, second-story apartment. I groaned, burying my face deeper into my sweat-drenched pillow. For the past 3 days, I had been battling a vicious strain of the flu, the kind that settles deep into your bones and makes every subtle movement feel like wading through setting concrete. My head throbbed with a relentless, pulsating ache, and my throat felt like it had been scrubbed with coarse sandpaper. "Amelia, open the door. It's the police." A stern, muffled voice echoed from the hallway. The words didn't register immediately. My fever-addled brain struggled to process the command. "Police." I thought sluggishly, my eyes darting around the dark, messy room. I tried to sit up, but a wave of nausea forced me back down against the mattress. There must be a mistake, a noise complaint. Did someone report a break-in? "Amelia, if you do not open this door, we will be forced to breach it. We have a warrant." The voice boomed again, this time with a sharp edge of impatience that cut right through the haze of my illness. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through the fever. I practically fell out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cold hardwood floor. I grabbed a thick wool blanket from the foot of the bed and wrapped it tightly around my shivering shoulders. My legs trembled uncontrollably as I stumbled down the short hallway, my vision blurring at the edges. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers numb and clumsy, before pulling the door open. 2 officers stood in the hallway, their expressions a mix of professional detachment and underlying suspicion. The taller one, a man with graying temples and sharp, assessing eyes, immediately held up a badge. "Amelia, we received a report of grand theft. We need to come inside and ask you a few questions." "Theft?" I rasped, my voice barely more than a cracked whisper. I leaned heavily against the doorframe, fighting the urge to collapse. "There has to be a mistake. I haven't left this apartment in 3 days. I've been incredibly sick." The second officer, a younger woman with her hand resting cautiously on her utility belt, stepped forward. "The report was filed 2 hours ago. The complainant stated that you stole a significant amount of high-value family heirlooms and jewelry from their residence." "Whose residence?" I asked, my heart hammering violently against my ribs, a sickening sense of dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. I already knew the answer before she spoke. I could feel it in the air, a toxic, familiar, suffocating weight. "Lydia," the officer read from a small notepad. "Your mother. She claims you visited her home yesterday, had an argument regarding childcare for your sister, Lucy, and subsequently left with over $10,000 worth of jewelry." The silence that followed was deafening. The air in the hallway seemed to evaporate. I stared at the officers, my mouth slightly open, trying to make sense of the absurdity of the accusation. My mother. My own mother had called the police and fabricated a felony charge against me. The sheer, calculated malice of it took my breath away. She knew I was sick. She knew I hadn't been to the house in weeks. She knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an ambush. This was her twisted way of forcing me back under her control. I invited them in, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold onto the blanket. I showed them my call logs, my food delivery receipts from the past 3 days, and the obvious, visible state of my severe illness. I explained the ongoing dispute about Lucy's new baby and my refusal to quit my job to be a free nanny. The officer's demeanor slowly shifted from accusatory to sympathetic as the reality of my mother's false report became undeniable. They left with apologies, advising me to document everything. I locked the door behind them and slid down to the floor, the cold wood biting into my skin. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis itself. The physical toll of the police visit was catastrophic. My temperature spiked, and I spent the next hour shivering violently on my living room floor, unable to summon the strength to crawl back to bed. But the physical agony paled in comparison to the emotional devastation tearing through my mind. I reached for my phone on the coffee table. My hands were still trembling, not just from the fever, but from an intoxicating cocktail of profound shock and simmering, white-hot rage. I found her contact name, Mom, a word that suddenly felt like a lie, a cruel joke. I pressed the call button. She picked up on the second ring. There was no hesitation, no surprise. "Well," Lydia's voice drifted through the speaker, crisp, calm, and entirely devoid of warmth. "I see you aren't in a holding cell. I suppose those officers were far too lenient." "You called the police on me," I breathed, my voice shaking with a terrifying intensity. "You lied to the police, Lydia. You could have had me arrested. You could have ruined my life, my career, everything. Over what? A nanny gig." "Don't be overly dramatic, Amelia," she sighed loudly, the sound carrying the heavy, practiced weight of a disappointed parent. "It was a necessary shock to your system. You have been acting incredibly selfishly lately. Your sister, Lucy, is in a very delicate state. She just brought a beautiful new life into this world, and instead of stepping up and fulfilling your duties to this family, you turn your back on us. You abandoned your sister when she needed you most." "My duties?" I countered, fighting through a coughing fit that left a metallic taste in my mouth. "My duty is to myself. I have a demanding career. I am a senior financial auditor. I work 60 hours a week. I cannot, and will not, quit my job to raise Lucy's child because she and Rowan refused to take responsibility for their own choices." "Rowan is an entrepreneur, Amelia," Lydia snapped, her tone sharpening instantly at the mention of his name. "He is building a foundation for their future. He cannot be distracted by changing diapers and nighttime feedings right now. And Lucy is far too overwhelmed. You are single, you have no real commitments. It is only logical that you move back into the house and take over the childcare. We are family. We make sacrifices for each other." "I have made nothing but sacrifices," I yelled, the raw volume of my voice tearing at my inflamed throat. "I have funded that household for years, but I am done. I moved out for a reason. I am not coming back, and I am certainly not becoming a free servant for Lucy and Rowan. And if you ever pull a stunt like this again, if you ever call the police on me with another fabricated lie—" "Or what?" Lydia interrupted, a cold, triumphant smirk practically audible in her tone. "You'll stop paying the internet bill. You'll stop sending the grocery money." "Oh, wait, you already did that when you threw your little tantrum and moved out last month. You have nothing left to threaten me with, Amelia. You are being childish. When you are ready to apologize and assume your proper role in this family, you know where we live. Until then, don't expect any sympathy from us." She disconnected the call. I stared at the darkened screen of my phone, the silence of my apartment pressing in on me like a physical weight. She was so confident. She was so utterly convinced of her own untouchable authority and my inherent powerlessness. She genuinely believed that because I had always yielded in the past, I would eventually break under this new, extreme pressure. She thought she held all the cards, that she resided securely in the family home I had supposedly abandoned, reigning over her favored daughter and her useless boyfriend. I closed my eyes, a slow, dark realization settling over my racing heart, freezing the panic into something sharp, cold, and immensely powerful. She was right about one thing. I had stopped paying the minor utility bills when I moved out, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the sheer audacity of Lydia's demands, you have to understand the decade that preceded this moment. Ever since my father passed away when I was 18, I had been the designated life raft for a family that was perpetually determined to sink. While my friends were navigating college dorms and exploring the world, I was juggling a full course load and 2 part-time jobs just to keep the electricity running at home. I paid for Lucy's braces. I paid for Lydia's car repairs. I sacrificed my 20s on the altar of their financial instability. The ultimate sacrifice, however, the one I never spoke of, happened 4 years ago. Lydia had fallen hopelessly behind on the mortgage. The bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings. She was days away from being dragged out of the only home she had ever known. Using every single penny of my savings, every bonus I had earned at my firm, and leveraging my impeccable credit, I bought the house directly from the bank. I structured it through a private trust to protect the asset and, quite frankly, to spare my mother the absolute humiliation of publicly losing the house to her eldest daughter. I allowed her to believe that a benevolent investor had stepped in and that her rent was simply covering the taxes and basic maintenance. In reality, she was living in my house, entirely at my mercy, a fact I had kept hidden out of a misplaced sense of love and familial duty. That sense of duty began to rapidly disintegrate the day Lucy brought Rowan into our lives. Rowan was 26 going on 15. He was the kind of man who always wore expensive, designer shirts but had scuffed, worn-out shoes. He was relentlessly polished, possessing a smooth, rehearsed charm that set my teeth on edge from the very first handshake. He didn't have a job, he had ventures. He didn't have an income, he had projected quarterly growth. He spent his days sitting in my living room, the living room I owned, typing aggressively on a sleek laptop and taking loud, boastful phone calls about crypto investments and disruptive tech startups that never seemed to actually materialize into anything tangible. From the beginning, Rowan's presence was deeply unsettling, but it was his insidious influence over Lydia that truly sounded the alarm bells. He had an uncanny ability to identify a person's weaknesses and exploit them. He saw how Lydia favored Lucy, how she viewed me solely as a utility, and he leaned into it aggressively. I remember a specific dinner, roughly 3 months before Lucy announced her pregnancy. I had just come home from a grueling 12-hour audit. I was exhausted, eating a cold plate of leftovers at the kitchen island while Rowan held court at the dining table. "It's just about resource allocation, Lydia," Rowan was saying, his voice dripping with faux intellectual authority as he swirled a glass of wine I had bought. "You see, true wealth isn't about working harder, it's about optimizing the assets you already possess. Take Amelia, for example." I stopped chewing, my fork hovering in the air. Rowan turned to me, offering a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're a financial auditor, right, Amelia? Making good money, I assume, but you're trading hours for dollars. It's a peasant's game. If you took that capital and invested it into my new logistics platform, we could triple your net worth in a year. Instead, you're just hoarding it. It's selfish, really, when the family could be utilizing that capital to elevate all of our lifestyles." "My finances are none of your business, Rowan," I had replied sharply, gripping the edge of the counter. "Now, Amelia, don't be rude," Lydia had instantly chimed in, rushing to his defense. "Rowan is just trying to help. He understands money in a way we don't. He has vision. He was just telling me the other day how unfair it is that you have so much disposable income, while your sister struggles to afford nice things." That was his game. He wasn't just unemployed, he was a parasite looking for a permanent host. When Lucy got pregnant, Rowan saw his ultimate opportunity. He convinced Lydia that his startup was on the verge of a multi-million-dollar breakthrough, but he needed absolute silence and focus. He couldn't be burdened with a screaming infant. And Lucy, sweet, naive, incredibly lazy Lucy, was more than happy to agree. The narrative was set, carefully constructed by Rowan and enthusiastically adopted by Lydia. Amelia was the wealthy, unburdened spinster who owed her family her time, her money, and her freedom. They wanted to reduce me to a live-in maid and a walking ATM. And when I finally said no, when I packed my bags and moved out to preserve my own sanity, they retaliated with the police. They wanted war. They just didn't realize who owned the battlefield. The fever finally broke just before dawn the following morning, leaving behind a cold, chilling clarity that washed over me like ice water. The lingering weakness in my limbs, the aches in my joints, all of it was completely eclipsed by a rigid, unyielding determination that settled deep in my chest. Lydia actually thought she could use the authorities as a weapon of intimidation. She truly believed she could fabricate a felony, terrify me into submission with the threat of handcuffs and a ruined career, and force me back into the tiny, suffocating box she had spent her life building for me. She wanted a terrified daughter. Instead, she had awakened a very angry senior financial auditor. I dragged myself out of bed and walked down the hall to my home office. I booted up my secure, multi-monitor workstation, the blue light illuminating the darkroom. I opened my personal financial archives, navigating through the encrypted folders until I found the one labeled Oak Street Trust. I clicked it open, staring at the scanned, watermarked documents inside. There it was, the warranty deed, legally binding and filed with the county. The property tax receipts paid in full on time every single year by my holding company. I traced the digital signature on the screen with my index finger. I wasn't just an ungrateful, runaway daughter. I was their landlord. I held the absolute legal right to the roof over their heads, the floor beneath their feet, and the very walls they were using to shelter their entitlement. The trap was already set. I just hadn't closed the jaws yet. But I wasn't going to spring that trap just yet. First, I needed to dismantle the architect of this current nightmare. I needed to destroy Rowan. As an auditor, tracing hidden assets, unraveling complex financial webs, and exposing fraudulent statements was not just my day job. It was my singular, obsessive expertise. Rowan claimed to be an elite entrepreneur. He paraded around my house spewing corporate buzzwords. I decided it was time to formally audit his life. I started with his full name, his phone number, and the names of the disruptive platforms he always boasted about at the dinner table. I logged into various Secretary of State business portals, running cross-reference checks across multiple jurisdictions. It took me less than 3 hours to completely and utterly shatter his entire fabricated existence. There was no venture capital. There was no Series A funding. There was no logistics platform. What I found instead was a pathetic digital trail of dissolved LLCs across 3 different states: Nevada, Delaware, and Florida. I pulled up county court dockets and uncovered multiple civil judgments against him for unpaid credit card debts, defaulted personal loans, and skipped rent. He was an administrative ghost, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills. But the most damning discovery required digging into secondary public records. Hidden deep within a state consumer protection agency database was a formal, multi-page complaint filed 2 years prior. Rowan had solicited seed money from several elderly individuals in a retirement community, promising them guaranteed returns on a fake health monitoring app. Once he collected the funds, the company evaporated, and so did he. He wasn't a misunderstood visionary. He was a low-level, predatory con artist. I spent the next 6 hours compiling every public record, every court docket, every dissolved corporate filing, and every fraud complaint into a massive, meticulously organized digital dossier. I hit print, listening to the rhythmic hum of the machine as it spit out page after page of his guilt. I bound the documents into a thick red folder, feeling the heavy, undeniable weight of the truth in my hands. 2 days later, my health was fully restored, and my simmering anger had crystallized into a state of absolute, terrifying calm. I sent Lydia a brief, non-negotiable text message. "I am coming over at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I want to discuss the police incident and the future of our arrangement. Ensure everyone is present in the living room." I didn't wait for a reply. I drove across town, the red folder sitting on the passenger seat like a loaded weapon. I pulled into the driveway of the house I owned. The front lawn was already looking overgrown, a testament to Rowan's absolute refusal to do a single minute of manual labor. I didn't knock. I didn't ring the doorbell. I took my brass key off my keyring, unlocked the front door, and stepped into the foyer. The smell of stale coffee and unwashed baby clothes hit me instantly, a sharp contrast to the pristine environment I used to maintain. Lydia, Lucy, and Rowan were waiting in the living room exactly as I had instructed. Lucy looked completely exhausted, dark circles bruised under her eyes, bouncing a fussy, crying newborn against her chest. Rowan was lounging horizontally on the expensive leather sofa I had purchased, aggressively tapping on his phone, wearing a pristine designer polo shirt. Lydia stood proudly by the fireplace mantel, her arms crossed tight against her chest, a look of profound, victorious smugness painted across her face. "Well," Lydia began, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet condescension the moment I walked into the room. "I'm glad you finally came to your senses, Amelia. I told the officers it was just a family misunderstanding and that I wouldn't press formal charges if you cooperated. Now, let's sit down and discuss your childcare schedule." "I'm not here to discuss a schedule," I interrupted, my voice perfectly level, carrying an icy authority that immediately silenced the room. I ignored her completely and walked straight toward the coffee table. I locked my eyes directly onto Rowan. I tossed the thick, red folder onto the glass surface. It landed with a loud, heavy slap that echoed in the quiet room. "I'm here to discuss your logistics platform, Rowan. The one you claim is currently in its Series A funding round." Rowan stopped tapping on his phone. He slowly sat up, looking at the bright red folder, then back up at me. A microscopic flicker of genuine, primal apprehension broke through his polished, arrogant exterior. "What are you talking about?" He scoffed, shifting uncomfortably, pulling at the collar of his shirt. "I'm talking about Apex Synergy Logistics," I stated clearly, enunciating every single syllable. "I'm talking about the fact that your Delaware LLC was involuntarily dissolved by the state for failure to pay basic franchise taxes 14 months ago. I'm talking about the $35,000 civil judgment against you in Clark County, Nevada, for defaulting on a high-interest personal loan. I audited you, Rowan. I know absolutely everything. You have no income, you have no investors, and you have no company. You are entirely bankrupt." Lydia gasped loudly, stepping forward, her face twisting in defensive fury. "Amelia, how dare you? What kind of insane, malicious jealousy is this? You are snooping into his private business affairs and making up lies just to avoid helping your sister." Rowan jumped up from the sofa, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. "This is absolute slander," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You're a sad, pathetic, lonely woman. You're just trying to ruin my reputation because you can't stand to see a real alpha male leading this family. I'll sue you for defamation. I'll have my legal team draft a cease and desist today. You'll be hearing from my attorneys by tomorrow morning." His threats were incredibly loud, horribly clumsy, and utterly hollow. The exaggerated, theatrical outrage, the immediate pivot to legal threats without addressing a single factual point, it was exactly the panicked reaction I expected from a cornered, desperate fraud. I just smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "I look forward to meeting your imaginary legal team, Rowan." The first confrontation ended exactly as I anticipated, with Lydia screaming at me to leave her house and never return until I was ready to grovel on my knees and beg for Rowan's forgiveness. I left willingly, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. I knew the seed of doubt had been firmly planted in Lucy's mind, but I wasn't finished. Rowan's pathetic lies required total annihilation. I needed the final, undeniable nail in his coffin. Returning to my apartment, I dug deeper into the consumer protection complaint I had discovered in his file. After hours of navigating public directories and making relentless phone calls, I managed to track down the primary victim mentioned in the filing. Her name was Martha, a 72-year-old retired elementary school teacher living in a modest duplex 3 towns over. I called her, carefully explaining my relation to Rowan and my deep concerns regarding my sister's safety. When Martha heard his name, her voice broke. Over a tearful, hour-long phone call, she explained the sheer devastation Rowan had caused. "He was so charming," Martha sobbed quietly over the line. "He told me the health monitoring app would revolutionize elder care. He promised me a guaranteed return. Amelia, he took the $40,000 I had saved for my husband's memory care facility. When the money cleared his account, his phone was disconnected. He destroyed our final years together." My blood ran cold. The sheer sociopathy of it was breathtaking. I asked Martha if she still had the paperwork. Still burning with a desire for justice, she gladly agreed to overnight mail me certified copies of the fraudulent contracts Rowan had coerced her into signing, complete with his forged signatures, the false financial guarantees, and the canceled checks proving he had personally deposited her life savings into his own depleted accounts. The very next evening, my phone vibrated on the coffee table. The caller ID flashed Lucy's name. When I answered, all I heard was the sound of ragged, muffled sobbing, accompanied by the distant, exhausted wails of her newborn. "Amelia," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling violently, sounding impossibly young and terrified. Is it true, what you said about his company?" "He's been lying to you from the very beginning, Lucy," I said gently, sitting up straight, my heart aching for my naive sister. "He's been lying to all of us." "He told Mom you faked those documents in that red folder," she cried softly, her breath catching in her throat. "He told us you were just a bitter, toxic person trying to break our family apart. But, Amelia, he hasn't bought a single box of diapers in 3 weeks. He's constantly asking Mom to transfer him some liquidity for his expenses. And last night, when he was asleep, I finally looked at his phone. There were so many text messages from debt collectors, dozens of them. Aggressive messages, I'm so scared." Her blind loyalty was finally cracking under the crushing, undeniable weight of reality. "I need you to be brave, Lucy," I instructed firmly, my voice unwavering. "Meet me tomorrow morning. Tell Mom and Rowan that I called you, crying, and that I have a final, generous financial settlement offer regarding the nanny situation. Tell them I am surrendering. Tell them to be in the kitchen at 10 o'clock sharp." The following morning, I walked back into the house, bypassing the living room and heading straight for the kitchen. I carried a thick, heavy manila envelope tucked tightly under my arm. Rowan was pacing the kitchen floor like a caged animal, looking incredibly agitated, chewing on his thumbnail. Lydia sat at the head of the kitchen table, her back perfectly straight, glaring daggers at me as I entered. Lucy stood nervously by the sink, clutching the baby so tight her knuckles were white. "You have exactly 5 minutes to make your formal apology and present your financial offer," Lydia snapped, folding her arms, thoroughly enjoying what she perceived as my surrender. "And it better be substantial after the stunt you pulled." "I don't have an apology," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a blade. I stepped up to the kitchen island and dropped the heavy envelope onto the marble counter. "I just have proof." I pulled out the sworn, notarized affidavit from Martha. I pulled out the heavily documented email chains. I pulled out the banking transfer records, proving Rowan had directly stolen a pensioner's medical fund. I slid the glossy, undeniable stack of evidence across the counter, stopping it right in front of Lucy. "He didn't just fail at business, Lucy. He is a predator," I stated, staring right into Rowan's panicked eyes. "He steals from the elderly. He robbed a retired schoolteacher of her husband's memory care funds, and right now, he is using our mother to fund his pathetic existence while he figures out who he is going to scam next." Rowan lunged forward across the island, his arm outstretched, desperately trying to snatch the papers off the counter. But I was faster. I slammed my hand down flat on top of the documents, pinning them to the marble. I leaned in close, my eyes locking onto his with absolute, unwavering authority. He froze. The color instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a sickly, pale sheen of sweat. He looked down at the damning signatures, then over at Lucy's absolutely horrified, tear-streaked face, and he finally realized that all of his smooth talking, all of his manipulative gaslighting, had just violently crashed into a brick wall of forensic, irrefutable truth. The silence that descended upon the kitchen was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic, distressed breathing of my sister and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. For a long, agonizing minute, nobody moved. The polished marble of the kitchen island seemed to amplify the stark, terrifying reality of the documents I held pinned beneath my hand. Lydia was the first to break the paralysis. She let out a sharp, derisive laugh that sounded more like a dry cough, aggressively waving her hand through the air as if she could simply bat away the facts. "This is absurd, Amelia. It really is. You expect me to believe that you managed to dig up some random papers, slap a fake stamp on them, and walk in here accusing Rowan of being a criminal. You have truly lost your mind. The jealousy you harbor for your sister's happiness is rotting your brain. Look at the seal, Lydia, I commanded, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that commanded immediate obedience. I didn't move my hand from the stack, but I slid the topmost document, the notarized affidavit from Martha, closer to the edge of the island where she could clearly see it. That is a raised, state-certified notary seal from 3 counties over. Look at the bank transfer routing numbers. Look at the dates. He drained a 72-year-old woman's life savings on May 14th. Lucy, what were you doing on May 14th? Lucy slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, swimming with tears that had not yet fallen. She looked at Rowan, who was practically hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically around the room looking for an exit. May 14th, Lucy whispered, her voice trembling so violently she could barely form the words. That was the week I was hospitalized for severe dehydration from morning sickness. You told me you couldn't come to the hospital because you were closing a massive seed round for the logistics platform. You told me you were securing our baby's future. I was. Rowan practically shrieked, his voice cracking, the smooth, polished veneer entirely shattered. He took a step toward Lucy, his hands raised in a pathetic, pleading gesture. Babe, you have to listen to me. This is just a misunderstanding. Business is complicated. Startups require aggressive capital acquisition. That old woman was an investor who didn't understand the risk profile of high-yield tech platforms. Amelia is twisting this to make me look bad. She's a sad, lonely, barren auditor who wants to destroy us because she has nothing of her own. She wasn't an investor, Rowan. I shouted, the raw volume of my voice echoing off the tile backsplash. She was a desperate woman trying to afford a memory care facility for her dying husband, and you stole from her. And you used that stolen money to buy those designer shoes you're wearing right now while you begged my mother for grocery money. Lucy gently placed the baby into the portable carrier resting on the dining table. Her movements were slow, deliberate, and chillingly calm. She walked back to the kitchen island, completely ignoring Rowan's frantic, babbling excuses. She looked down at the documents. She traced the forged signatures with her trembling index finger. She read the desperate, pleading emails from Martha that I had printed out. I watched as the last remnants of her naive innocence burned away, replaced by a devastating, undeniable realization. The man she loved, the father of her child, was not a misunderstood genius. He was a monster. You took her money, Lucy stated. It wasn't a question. It was a final, damning verdict. She turned to face Rowan, her expression hardening into something I had never seen before, pure, unadulterated disgust. You let me cry about hospital bills while you were stealing from the elderly. You let my sister pay for my prenatal vitamins while you lied to my face every single day. Lucy, please, Rowan begged, taking another step forward, reaching out to grab her arm. Don't touch me. Lucy screamed, her voice tearing through the house with a ferocity that made both Lydia and Rowan physically recoil. Do not ever put your hands on me again. Get out. I want you out of this house right now. Pack your pathetic, empty briefcases and get out of my life. Rowan's pathetic pleading instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden, ugly sneer. His true colors, devoid of any charm or manipulation, finally bled through. I'm not going anywhere, he spat, crossing his arms and planting his feet firmly on the kitchen floor. I live here. My child lives here. You can't just kick me out onto the street because your crazy sister printed out some fake papers. Lydia, tell her I'm not leaving. Lydia, completely overwhelmed by the sheer velocity of the conflict, opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her the chance. I had waited 4 long years for this exact moment. Actually, Rowan, I said, my voice eerily calm, ringing with absolute, chilling authority as I reached into my bag and pulled out the second envelope, the thick, heavy envelope containing the Oak Street Trust documents. You don't live here, and as of this morning, neither does she. I opened the second envelope and pulled out the crisp, legally binding warranty deed. I laid it flat on the kitchen island, right next to the evidence of Rowan's fraud. "What is that?" Lydia demanded, her voice shaking with a sudden, unexplainable apprehension. She stepped closer, her eyes scanning the complex legal jargon at the top of the page. "What is the Oak Street Trust? What are you doing, Amelia?" "I am showing you the reality of your situation, Mother," I replied, tracing my finger over the bolded text at the bottom of the page. 4 years ago, when the bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on this house, a private investor stepped in and bought the debt. They allowed you to stay, paying a nominal rent that barely covered the property taxes. I am the sole beneficiary and trustee of the Oak Street Trust. I am the investor. I own this house, Lydia. I own the roof over your head. I own the floor you are standing on. And I own the front door that you are all about to walk out of. The color drained from Lydia's face with such terrifying speed, I thought she might faint. She reached out, gripping the edge of the marble counter for physical support. Her eyes darted from the deed to my face and back to the deed. "No," she gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "No, that's impossible. You didn't have that kind of money. You were just a junior auditor. You couldn't have." "I used every single penny of my savings," I explained, feeling a profound, crushing weight lifting off my chest with every word I spoke. "I sacrificed my own financial security to save you from being thrown out onto the street. I kept it a secret to save your pride. I let you pretend you were still the matriarch of this domain. And how did you repay me? You allowed a predatory con artist to move in. You demanded I quit my career to become an unpaid servant. And when I finally established a single boundary, you called the police and tried to have me arrested for grand theft." I reached into the envelope one final time and pulled out 2 formal, notarized documents. I slid the first one toward Lydia and the second one toward Rowan. "These are formal, legally binding 30-day notices of eviction," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You have 30 days to vacate my property. I am placing the house on the market next month. But Rowan, I wouldn't worry too much about finding an apartment." Rowan stared at the eviction notice, his jaw slack, his arrogant facade completely pulverized into dust. What do you mean?" he stammered, taking a step backward toward the hallway. "I mean that before I drove over here today," I said, offering him a cold, merciless smile, "I sent a digitized copy of this entire red folder, including Martha's sworn affidavit, your forged contracts, and the bank transfer records, directly to the state's Attorney General's Fraud Division, as well as Adult Protective Services. Given your history of skipping town, I also took the liberty of copying the local police department, the same department Lydia so generously introduced me to. I imagine they will be looking for you very, very soon." Rowan didn't say another word. He didn't look at Lucy. He didn't look at his child. He simply turned on his heel, sprinted down the hallway, yanked the front door open, and ran to his car. The sound of his tires screeching out of the driveway was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. Lydia collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with loud, dramatic sobs. I felt absolutely nothing for her. The well of my empathy had run completely dry. I turned my attention to Lucy. She was standing by the baby carrier, tears streaming silently down her cheeks, looking entirely lost and broken. I walked around the island and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. She flinched for a fraction of a second before collapsing into my arms, sobbing uncontrollably into my shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Amelia," she wept, her fingers gripping the fabric of my sweater like a lifeline. "I was so stupid. I was so blind. I didn't know." "I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't, Lucy," I whispered, holding my sister tightly, feeling the years of built-up resentment beginning to slowly melt away. "But you know the truth now, and you don't ever have to be afraid of him again." The next 30 days were a whirlwind of vindicating chaos. True to my promise, the authorities acted swiftly on the meticulously organized evidence I provided. Rowan was apprehended 2 states over attempting to board a bus, facing multiple felony counts of wire fraud and elder abuse. His desperate attempts to contact Lucy from jail went entirely unanswered. Lydia, entirely stripped of her delusions of grandeur and her financial safety net, was forced to aggressively downsize. She moved into a tiny, cramped one-bedroom apartment across town, and for the first time in over a decade, was forced to apply for an entry-level retail job to support herself. She attempted to call me several times, leaving tearful, manipulative voicemails about family forgiveness, but I blocked her number. I was done being her utility. As for Lucy, I didn't let her fall. I used the proceeds from the rapid sale of the Oak Street house to secure her a modest, safe apartment of her own, prepaying a year's worth of rent to give her time to breathe. I helped her enroll in online classes, utilizing my professional network to find her flexible, remote data entry work so she could provide for her child independently. Our relationship was fragile, scarred by the betrayal, but it was finally built on honesty rather than manipulation. A few months later, I stood by the large window of my own apartment, sipping a hot cup of tea and watching the city lights begin to flicker against the evening sky. I wasn't just a senior financial auditor anymore. I was a woman who had meticulously audited her own life, identified the toxic liabilities, and ruthlessly cut them out. I was finally, truly free.